Welcome, friends, to this live stream for Empty Cloud Monastery, New Jersey. I'd like to begin as usual by paying homage to our teacher, the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Yam nanusati natena sangam gacchati. So welcome again, dear friends. Today I'd like to share some teachings from Samyutta Nikaya, from the Book of the Khandas, huge volume, which gives lots of teachings about the 5 khandas, the 5 heaps, the 5 aspects of our experience that are body, feelings, perceptions, mental formations, cognizing, and consciousness. And I've chosen a couple of suttas from this large volume in Samyutta Nikaya, 35 and 36. So it's Samyutta 22, 35 and 36. 35 and 36 are the Anyattara Bhikkhu suttas, and they're 2 accounts of monks coming to see the Buddha and asking him that question that he was so often asked and that led to so many amazing teachings. The question being, can you teach me the Dharma in brief so that I can go away and practice for liberation on my own? The Dharma in brief. And there are so many amazing, as I say, teachings in this way from the Buddha. And these are 2 examples, very similar examples of what the Buddha said in response to this request. So the first one, I just chanted a little bit at the beginning. I think my internet's a little dodgy, so I'm going to pause if I see myself freezing and hope that we'll get through okay in that way. So yeah, 35, 22, 35 Samyutta. A mendicant went up to the Buddha, bowed and sat down and asked him the question. And the Buddha responded by saying, okay, mendicant, you are defined by what you have an underlying tendency for. You are not defined by what you have no underlying tendency for. Yam nanusati natena sankangachati. So you're not defined. That it actually, in the Pali, friends, there's no sense of personhood here, which is very interesting. As often when we look at the Pali, it's not about being somebody. The actual words of the Buddha here, he says, the things which are inclined towards, the things which are obsessed around, that are made much of, that are imagined, the things that are, I'm going to look it up in the translation, this word nanusati, the things which are lying dormant but still present, comes into this meaning. Those things which are adhered to. So anything that is adhered to, inclined towards, or where there's an underlying tendency towards, it is those things that create the definition, that create something, that create some sort of happening. So this is a really profound statement from the Buddha. We create, or creation happens, or reification happens, or there is a leaning towards aspects of reality. And in that leaning towards, inclining towards something, that something is embellished. It is, in a way, supported and grows because of that inclining. And in the same way, as the Buddha went on to say, that which is not inclined towards, that which is not obsessed around, where there's no underlying tendency towards something, then that thing fades away. It no longer happens. It no longer exists. It no longer manifests. There's so much here for us to consider. I'd like to, before we launch into considering this pithy teaching from the Buddha, which the monk, by the way, who heard the teaching, understood it well and was able to go away and practice with just this much. But I'm going to look first at, let's look at 2236, the following sutta, Dutyanyattara Bhikkhu Sutta. Very, very similar. Another mendicant goes to the Buddha, asks, please, will you explain the Dharma to me in brief so that I can go away and practice for liberation? And the Buddha says this. He says, monk, you're measured against what you have an underlying tendency for. And you're defined by what you're measured against. You're not measured against what you have no underlying tendency for, and you're not defined by what you're not measured against. Again, in the Pali, friends, I'm going to try and give the meaning more closely to the actual words of the Buddha here. In the Pali, he's saying that which is not inclined towards cannot be made measure of, and that which cannot be made measure of cannot be defined, cannot be created, cannot be reified. So I'm just taking away the personal and noting here that the Buddha spoke in terms of these concepts rather than in terms of what we do or do not do. But we surely do have agency here to consider this teaching and to act in accordance with it, for sure, which is why these translations are actually very helpful, to say we're not measured against the things that we don't incline towards, the things we don't have underlying tendencies around, the things we're not attached to. We can't be measured by those things. And we can't be defined by the things which we're not measured by. So this second sutta is just another slightly more embellished form of the same teaching that we find in 2235. So pithy, so all-encompassing, this teaching. And so we have to unpack it. We have to try and understand, what does this mean in terms of our practice, our life, our understanding of the Dharma? So we can immediately pick up, I think, that there's an encouragement here around looking at what we're attached to and being willing to recognize that there is a possibility here that we can let go of our attachments, and in letting go of our attachments, something ceases there. Something comes to an end. Something no longer exists, and that is suffering in all its different flavors. That is a particular inclination that's faded away, and we're that much freer as it's passed away from us. It's like the burden has been put down to that extent. So what are the things that we can incline towards? What are the things that we can be measured by and defined by? And one way of considering this is in terms of the khandas. And here, the two monks who received these two teachings, so similar teachings, both are asked by the Buddha after they've expressed their appreciation and understanding. He says, have you really understood this teaching? So there's a slightly longer conversation in both cases where the Buddha checks to see whether these monks have understood this brief teaching and can indeed go away and practice for liberation on their own. And in both cases, they both did understand the teaching, and they explain it like this. If you have an underlying tendency for form, for physicality, rupa, you are defined by that. If you have an underlying tendency for feeling, you're defined by that. If there's an underlying tendency for perception, one is defined by that. If there's an underlying inclination towards thinking, mental formations, then one is defined by that. And if there's an underlying inclination towards consciousness, one is defined by that. So breaking this up, starting to explore what this actually means in our experience, we can look at it in terms of the five khandas. These five aspects of our experience. Do we incline towards these? And if so, how so? And when we do incline towards them, can we see how we're creating, becoming, augmenting the suffering, augmenting the sense of self? So in terms of body, what we incline towards, that we are measured by, that we are defined by. And we can see how much or how little we are attached to this sense of this body, this physical form. We can see in the world around us, can't we, how physical form is made much of, and we're encouraged to, consider and even be concerned about and worry about the shape of it, the size of it, the weight of it, the degree of aging or youthfulness in these physical forms are made much of in the world around us. And we really celebrate beauty in the physical form. And so, as a direct consequence of that, we suffer when there's a falling short from that beauty, which is most people, of course. Most people are concerned then about their appearance in one way or another, or feel ashamed, or feel uncomfortable, or dissatisfied with the physical appearance. There's a great tendency to want to live as long as possible in our cultures nowadays, rather than just going with the flow of nature and lying down and dying when the time comes with perfect equanimity. No, we fight, we struggle, we rail against our fate. I'm reminded of the Dylan Thomas poem, to rage against the dying of the light. This beautiful poet who died young as an alcoholic, very tormented being, was encouraging us to fight death, treat death as an enemy. And this is just a whole load of suffering for us. But these bodies and our attachment to these bodies is very strong for most of us. And our culture, our communities, our history is an encouragement to fight for these bodies, to want them to go on forever, to struggle to accept their natural trajectory towards old age, sickness, and death. And thank you, Joseph. I'm going to try and share some more concrete images. So here we are with the body. We can be duped in so many ways without even necessarily noticing what's happening through advertising, through TV, the media, all sorts of images that we receive from the world around us that are encouraging a reification of body, making much of body, defining ourselves by our physicality. And let's be aware of this, let's consider this, and let's ask ourselves, how do I view this body? How do I relate to it? Do I relate to it as an object that's beautiful or not? Or do I inhabit this body and open to letting go of attachment to it through investigation of the body, through understanding, through feeling, through experience, rather than seeing the body as some sort of item that we put on, covering that we traipse around in, whose appearance is all important. And the next khandha of feeling, if we incline towards feeling, we will be measured by it. We will be defined by that. Do we want to be defined by feeling, by our emotions? Do we want to be slaves to feeling? Do we want to be led on by feelings, pleasant feelings, wanting more, unpleasant feelings, wanting to get away from? Do we want to be slaves to feeling in this way? And I say that because when we follow our inclinations in these ways, then we create more of the same, don't we? So just to notice this is how we get defined. If we pursue particular feelings, inclinations, if I like to feel in certain ways, my particular favorite foods and drinks and sources of entertainment, ways in which I enjoy the world around me through sights, sounds, smells, tastes, touch, that give rise to pleasant feeling. If I pursue these pleasant feelings and make much of them, then I will be measured by that. I will become that kind of a person, a hedonistic kind of a person in this case, a person who's seeking pleasurable experiences. And honestly, so many of us do live in this way, going from one treat to the next, one much looked forward to event, outing, trip, meeting to the next. And so when we do this, we can see how this defines us. We become this kind of a person. Also, in terms of perception, here we can start to really delve deep, because we often feel that our perceptions are true and couldn't be any other way. So we perceive colors in a certain way, sights in a certain way, and then more in a way challengingly, we can perceive events in certain ways, collective situations, political matters, community matters in certain ways, and we can become defined as a believer in a particular, philosophy or political ideology or way of holding value systems. And when we become defined in this way, things can become quite concretized, rigidify. We can get a bit set in our views, can't we? And we notice this when we come across people who have very different perceptions, and we might find ourselves disagreeing with them, even arguing with them. And so when it comes to perceiving, the ways in which we perceive the world, can we consider this? Are we willing to deconstruct this, to see the inclination and work towards loosening, softening, and letting go of such inclinations. So we can't be defined in this way. Let's not be defined through our perceptions, which leads on to mental formations, our conceptual ways of putting things together, the kind of constellations of thought that we have, and a sort of step beyond perception into something more formed and concrete. I'm speaking of things like memories, views, opinions, ideas about things, about the way things are, or about the way we would like things to be. All of the conceptualization, we are defined by the way we think, by the views we hold, the opinions we have. And we can notice this. I'm this kind of a person. She or he is that kind of a person. Are we making much of our thoughts, friends? Are we making much of our ideas about things and holding to them? And can we recognize where there's attachment to thinking, to ideas, and be willing to just feel out what it's like to have a strong opinion about anything at all, really, to have a strong view about anything at all, however correct it may feel, however right, however vital it may feel for us, because we don't want to be measured by that. We don't want to be defined by that. Why not? Because it's suffering for us. And to find our way out of suffering is to disentangle ourselves from all these ways of creating, of holding, of shouldering the burden. And lastly, I want to speak about consciousness as a way that we can incline. Some people incline towards thinking, and consciousness is their predominant mode of being. Those who have a spiritual practice can often fall into this category. We're not so much into perhaps the body beautiful, fitness, bodybuilding, athleticism. We may be, but that may not be our most defining aspect. We may not be into sensual pleasures. The world of emotion may not nourish and feed us so much. We may find that quite painful and agitating as spiritual practitioners. That may not be so much a way in which we define ourselves or that we can be measured. But when it comes to thinking and the ideas around practice, the wish to develop spiritually, the inclination towards path and service, and all the aspects of bhavana, of development, this we can incline very strongly towards, and we can be defined by this. And oftentimes we are. I mean, sitting here as a Buddhist monastic, it's pretty obvious that I am defined by this. And yet, we can take this teaching in its fullness and recognize that we don't want to be measured by anything at all, to be defined by anything at all. And so let's see, where we may have attachment to our path of practice, to our life as a meditator, to our walking the Buddhist path. It's not to say that this is an unfortunate thing. It's not something to stop doing, but we can tease out, friends, investigate and recognize where there's an attachment, where there's an inclination that we can be measured by, that we can be defined by. that we may be holding, that we may be carrying, that may have some weight for us, because everything that we're carrying, we want to be able to put down. We want to be able to shed that weight and to breathe freely, you know. So it's very profound when we look at this teaching in all its aspects. And in both these suttas, the bhikkhus explain to the Buddha their understanding of his encouragement not to incline towards anything whatsoever. And he gave them the blessing and sent them away knowing that they'd got it. It doesn't mean when we say we understand a teaching that we necessarily can immediately put it into practice to the extent that we can shed the burden completely, all in one go. This is more an opportunity for us to investigate attachment, to investigate where we may be holding, cleaving, clinging to our thoughts, our views, consciousness itself as me and mine, perceptions, feelings, this body. And again we'll get the chance to investigate this sense of tethering, of being in bondage in some way or other. And for me personally, I generally notice clinging through a sense of unease. There's a sense of suffering, however subtle, however strong. That's the guide really for us to open to where is the source of this suffering. And what we'll inevitably find is that there's some holding or clinging to some aspect of experience. And the most significant way in which we hold to experience is through defining it as personal, isn't it? As me, as mine, as myself. In some way, this creation of self around experience happens. Without this happening, there is no clinging. It's a constellation. These things come together. We suffer because we cling, because we have a sense of self. These three come together, and there is the place, there is the knot, there is the inclining, there is the creating, there is the definition. And so this we want to investigate again and again. And personally, I find it comes clearest where there's unease. For another person, it may be self-consciousness. For another, it may be desire. And sometimes it can be desire, and sometimes it can be some kind of irritability, not wanting, that arises. So the flag goes up, the warning flag. We feel some discomfort, some disliking, some liking, some self-consciousness, and there we can begin to investigate what's going on. What are these thoughts that are causing me agitation? What is this feeling that's creating unease? Coming into the body, so helpful to ground us in order for this investigation to take place. We can really take to heart from this teaching, friends, that the Buddha was not just here, but in many other teachings, telling us how we're creators. You know, we're creating our suffering, and we don't have to do this. We have to realize that we're creating our suffering, and then we can begin to stop doing that. The beautiful sutta in Majjhima Nikaya, the first sutta, Mulapariyaya Sutta, is all about this incredibly clear, decisive teaching of the Buddha, pointing out to us how we embellish reality, how we self it, how we create a self around it, how we magnify, how we imagine, how we proliferate around the simple reality. And in Mulapariyaya Sutta, this first sutta in Majjhima Nikaya, the Buddha points out the different aspects of reality that are simply existent in and of themselves. Earth, water, fire, air, the elements, the physical world, all the different kinds of beings in all the different planes of existence, and the different possibilities for this mind to inhabit reality in ever more subtle ways. That is the jhana. Infinite space, infinite consciousness, nothingness, neither perception nor non-perception. These realities are simply present in and of themselves. And what the Buddha points to in Majjhima number 1 is that we have the root defilements of ignorance, of desire, and of aversion. And because of these tendencies, these inclinations that we have as dormant tendencies, when we come into contact with reality, we will put a spin on it. We will not see it for what it is, but rather create a whole load of complexity around it. And so this sutta is a beautiful description of our predicament. This is the source of our unease. This is the source of all the suffering in the world, is this tendency to create something out of nothing, to distort reality, to fail to simply be present. And all of our work as practitioners is to begin to tease out and untangle these tendencies. And in doing so, we're uprooting slowly but surely these root defilements of greed, hatred, and confusion, ignorance. So Majjhima 1 is like an extended version of these pithy teachings in the Samyuttas 22, 35, and 36, because it's saying the same thing, that we want to be aware of our tendency toward proliferation through seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, through experience of form, experience of perceptions, feelings, consciousness, cognizing. We will have the lens of desire or aversion or confusion through which we look at all these aspects of reality, and they become distorted for us. We don't know we're doing it until we stop and start to pay attention. And that is why the Buddha consistently exhorted his disciples to go meditate, so we can stop spinning, stop reeling around in suffering, sit still, find a quiet place, and just breathe, feel what we feel, come to the simple reality of this moment. And inexorably then, friends, the momentum of, in a way, delusion making, creating, embellishing, proliferating, that momentum can begin to wind down, and we can start to experience some degree of clarity, of peace, of letting go. And this is our journey. And we can use the teachings to remind us, to notice how we can so easily get caught up in the body, feelings, perceptions, sights, sounds, smells, tastes. We can so easily get caught up and get carried away by our experience and start creating. We're doing it all the time. And so in order to recognize this, we have these great teachings and we have the practice, and we want to find quiet places, and we want to sit, and we want to stop and allow reality to disentangle for us. I'm going to have a look because I see that there are some relevant questions. I've just been glimpsing them as I've been speaking. Thank you all for your presence and your greetings also. Thank you, Joseph. Joseph's given some great pointers. I'd like to share this one. Would you kindly share an example of two people in the same situation where one is defined and measured by the situation and the other is not? That is beautiful. Thank you, Joseph. Yes. Let's consider a situation where one person can be very, we could say, triggered, very involved, very caught up, and another person can be quite unfazed. This is really helpful that you bring this in, Joseph, because there's the very important point here that there's a difference between being uninvolved and being indifferent. So, say a situation where there's some harm being done to somebody in the vicinity of two watchers, two people who witness some harm being done. Someone is verbally abusing another person, and they're both watching. And one person could get very triggered if they've had, say, some history with one of the people in the exchange. If they know them, if they have been treated in a similar way themselves, they've received similar verbal abuse in the past, they may be very triggered. They may have some trauma that gives a very strong feeling of fear, say, or reactivity, anger. The other person may witness a person being verbally abused and feel compassion for the one who's being abused and also the abuser. Compassion as a result of not turning away from the scene, not being not upset because they don't care, but rather having the capacity to maintain equanimity, and compassion will naturally arise, and perhaps even some action, which will be right action, coming from a place of peacefulness. Why is it some people are triggered and others are not? What is it that triggers us? It gives us an opportunity when we're reacting to something that we see or hear or that happens to us. When it brings up a strong reaction for us, this is our opportunity to tease out. There'll be some inclining towards some definition here that we can explore and some holding to suffering that we can then, through understanding, let go of the suffering. So we could say that on the spiritual path, there's no unfortunate incidents that happen, because even if we happen to be the person who gets triggered, who's very reactive, who's very upset, who's somehow deeply touched and suffering because of something that's happening around us, this is not a problem. This is an opportunity, because we get to see there's some work that we can do here to free up, to let go of suffering. And if we have let go of suffering to any degree, we may notice situations where we may have been triggered in the past and now we're not. Or we may have people around us who are very distressed by situations that we're also aware of, but we're not distressed because we've understood to that extent and let go of suffering to that extent. And it is a really important point that people who are not touched by experience, who are indifferent to experience, or who are ignoring experience, this is something very different from those who have the awareness of what's happening, but not the reactivity. This is the goal for us, to be opening to experience, not ignoring it, not turning away from or cultivating indifference towards the world around us, but rather really immersed in the world around us, open to the world around us, intimately connected to the world around us, because we're able to maintain our equanimity, because we are not able to be traumatized, because there's no holding to anything that might have that kind of experience. I hope that makes sense. I feel I'm not particularly clear today somehow. But I'm sure you all can consider these teachings and make use of them. And I'll just see if there's any other comments or questions. Something here from Bhavani, and then I'm coming back to an earlier question to finish. Bhavani, hi. Namaste, namaste. I lost my son recently. I don't want to think about him to avoid attachment. Is it correct, Ayya? Please excuse my ignorance. I very badly need your guidance. Thank you, Bhavani. I'm so sorry for your loss. It is so hard to lose a son. I can't even imagine, not having children myself, but I appreciate how very, very difficult it must be for you, and how to navigate at this time with all the feelings and thoughts and memories and the pain that you're going through. You asked specifically, you don't want to think about him to avoid attachment. Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't dwell, I wouldn't bring up thoughts about your son, but quite naturally, of course, I imagine that thoughts about your son will arise and be with you probably fairly often, if not all the time. Some reflections around his life and how much you miss him and who he was for you and for others. And my feeling is that, this is a time to really develop meditation practice, to be able to sit and be present for whatever is arising for you, and to let that be okay is the practice. So to meditate, to focus on an object of meditation, if that's what you do, the breath or the body, and then to see whatever thoughts and feelings come into the mind and heart, just to breathe, just to be present for that. And so in this way, very naturally, allow yourself to open to the way things are at this time. And of course, there's likely to be thoughts of your son, grief, strong feelings, also love and happiness in memories of good times that you've had. All of these things, all of the maelstrom of different possible emotions, feelings, and thoughts, just allow. And if you find that you're feeling overwhelmed or getting caught up, if there's an inclining towards any particular experience, remember these teachings and maybe just come back to the breath and back to the body. If you notice you're suffering, you're caught up, you're overwhelmed, then return to the breath, return to the body, come back to the reality. And so we can do this dance in our practice, all of us, friends, isn't it? We're able to meditate, to be present, and then we see how all sorts of feelings, thoughts, and memories can come up for us. And let it be like, let ourselves notice when and if we get immersed in that material, and come back to that stance of the one who knows, the observer, the wise one who's watching all of this unfold and learning from it and letting go. These things are synonymous, really. We learn, we let go, we understand, things fall away. And so my humble suggestion to you, Bhavani, will be to be present, meditate. Don't allow yourself to be distracted by anything else. Just give yourself lots of space and time to feel what you feel and observe it. Be the wise witness of your experience, and the Dharma will reveal everything to you that you need to know and help you every step of the way to find the way out of suffering, just as we all are on this path to free ourselves from suffering. Thank you so much for your sharing, and I hope that can be helpful, Bhavani. Okay. Yeah. Oh, beautiful comments in relation to your question, Bhavani, from Manal. Yeah, it's great sympathy. May you find peace in your heart and practice. May you be well. Yeah, I'm sure we all share these sentiments, and huge support and good wishes for you. Thank you, Manal. And also Madeline says, perhaps, Bhavani, you could make merit for your beloved son to help him in the next life. And she's sending healing blessings. Thank you, Madeline. Beautiful points, important points. Yes, Bhavani, that is a great encouragement there from Madeline. Isn't it so that when we're struggling and suffering a great loss, as you are, it can be so helpful to do something for someone else, to make merit, to be generous, to serve, to visit and see monastics, to spend time with spiritual friends, to make offerings, and to be active in this way can also be so helpful. Indeed, you're not going to want to sit and meditate 24/7. There's plenty else that can be done to find ways to ease your heart at this time. So big appreciation for that, Madeline. Making merit, yes, a very good way to ease the heart and to give a sense of well-being. And that's so important. Also, a lot of love and compassion for yourself and for those around you who are also sharing your loss, to make much of that and to really find ways to resource yourself, to nurture yourself, to take good care of yourself at this time. Yeah. And this is a beautiful comment as well. You might be seeing these, Madeline, but I want to share this with those tuning in different ways. From Jay, who so rightly says, you're making merit by being resilient and also listening to the Dharma. Sadhu, Jay. That is so true. Bhavani, we have this practice. We have the Buddha's teachings. We are so blessed, and really counting the blessings and taking your strength from your Sangha here also. And we will be thinking of you beyond this conversation, all of those who are tuning in also, your friends in Dhamma. So what blessings we have. Yeah. And Joseph says so beautifully, thank you, Joseph. May the positive energy generated, not just by rejoicing in the generosity of this Dhamma talk, but from all our kind thoughts, words, and deeds, past, present, and future, contribute to the alleviation. Bhavani. Sadhu, Joseph. Beautiful. Friends, I'm going to go back to a question that I spotted from Anuradha Kumari. Anuradha, thank you for tuning in and for your question. So I think I'll finish with this probably, unless any other questions come in. But Anuradha says, how to maintain a constant and regular study of 15 plus hours as a medical student. That's a tough one. It's a lot of hours. I was also a medical student and I put in a lot of hours. So I do have empathy and appreciation for your situation. Personally, I would say when I was a medical student, I was a meditator as well. And I guess you are. And I personally found it really helpful to have breaks, to practice sitting meditation, practice walking meditation. Because when we're studying a lot, we're very sedentary anyway. And so if you can get out in nature and do some walking meditation a few times every day, more time spent relaxing and slightly less time spent studying can be very helpful in my experience. But also you'll find, that your practice gives you some clarity and good focus, and also hopefully you sleep well because you're practicing. Practice meditation, practice loving kindness, and you're likely to be able to take good care of the body and mind so as to make the most of your time that you have for study. Really wish you well with your studies, and thank you for your inclination and determination to be a person who takes care of others in the future. That is a very noble aspiration, and you will have a very rich life of service at the end of this study, and for that I'm very glad. Thank you, Anuradha, and all the best to you. So, friends, I think I will conclude here. We can finish with 3 grateful, kind, uplifting sadhus for our teacher, the Buddha, who's given us all of this wonderful Dhamma nourishment in our lives. All good wishes to everyone. Let's finish with 3 sadhus. Sadhu, 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 anumodami.